So I'm going to give you two quotes and then I'm going to tell you a story. So quote one, these will remain anonymous, these quotes, but some people will recognize where they're from. True leadership depends on example and not vain displays of power and glory. That's quote one. Quote number two, we do not have to be especially distinguished among our fellows in order to be profoundly happy and useful. So here's the story. So when I was first getting clean in my late 20s, I worked as a labourer for a couple of years, and the first people that gave me a job were the sannyasins. So if any of you have seen that Netflix documentary, Wild Country, it's all about the guru Osho. They're a crazy bunch, a kind of free love cult, following the Indian guru Osho, and it was a really crazy scene. On his death there were power struggles and gunfights and all sorts of crazy stuff. Anyway, there are a bunch of characters, that's for sure. To their credit, the London branch, if you like, of sannyasins, I had a friend who had a friend, and he was a sannyasin or a follower of Bhagwan. They've got various names, because Osho's other name was Bhagwan. And they were mostly composed of guys and girls who'd been in quite a lot of trouble, had drug problems, maybe been involved in crime, that sort of thing, but who'd somehow managed to pull themselves round following Osho. I mean, for his sins, for all his sins, he probably did, his communes and so on probably did provide a place for lost people to build a community. And so this was the London branch of the sannyasins. And because they were open and kind of people who were involved in change and who had checkered past themselves, this friend of a friend gave me a job with their building firm, their construction firm, who were all sannyasins. I was the only one, I think there were two, maybe three of us out of 20 that weren't followers of the Bhagwan. And yeah, I was profoundly happy in early days of sobriety, just doing my labouring job. I'd do 12-step meetings in the evening and I'd work really hard in the day. I was a young dad. I'd separated from her mother at that point, but there was a feeling of optimism that this newfound sobriety was the way to go. In fact, I'd say I was having a spiritual awakening for sure. And this labouring job was perfect because it gave me something to do. It built me back up physically, and there was a limited amount of responsibility. So to put it in blunt terms, I was the bottom of the food chain, which will be relevant to this story. So anyway, I had some of the lads I really got on well with, and they were very, very kind to me, as people who've been through trouble themselves often are. And the boss, though, who, while basically deep down, I think, being a decent guy, I would say was probably in vain pursuit of power and glory, or something like that, in his own little world of posh West London construction jobs, and so he was somewhat on a different level to the rest of us. He was ambitious and I think consequently quite a lot of the time more emotionally disturbed than the rest of us, because he had more on his shoulders, and he had a drug and alcohol problem, clearly did. So anyway, one of my jobs was to go and pick up things from the builder's merchant in the van. And I'd been having increasingly tense interactions with this boss, who will remain nameless. Mostly one way, to be fair. I felt he was kind of testing me because it was known amongst the guys that I was in recovery, in early recovery, and I had a kind of shine about me, like you do when you when you've stopped your addiction in your late 20s, early 30s, so you repair quite quickly. And I was on a pink cloud, working a program, doing well. So I think that the boss, it triggered something in him because he was an active addict. So he would do things like, at the end of the day when we're sweeping up, clearing up, he'd come up and say something like, oh, those stairs, I'd clean the stairs really well on this renovation job. And he'd say, oh, you know, there's a couple of bits of fluff on the 4th step. You know, I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. He'd nitpick, right? And so I'd go, okay, and I'd just go and do what he said. And in fact, that was the instruction I'd been given by my mentor, by my recovery mentor. He'd said to me, in the Bible, he wasn't a particularly Christian guy, but he was well read. And he said, in the Bible it says, if they ask you to go 1 mile, go 2. Right? Which means when people are pushing you beyond your limits, it's that kind of Christian vibe of turn the other cheek, to which there are limits, of course. Personal safety, for example, or the safety of people that depend on you. You wouldn't turn the other cheek necessarily in every situation, I think, but in a petty dispute like that, you know, be the bigger man, basically. So I was practicing that, and you know what? The more I did that, the worse it got, because it just kind of proved that I was on a different kind of footing. And I think it became a game of, let's see if we can disturb Ali's serenity, my serenity. It didn't. And this all came to a head when I drove one day to this builder's merchant in the van, parked the van in the wrong place, got a parking ticket. And then a couple of days later, the parking ticket comes through, so the boss comes to find me. I think quite pleased, really, that he had me backed up into a corner this time. And on this occasion, I did stick up for myself, and I said, you know what, John, that wasn't his name. It's probably an Indian name, like these followers of Bhagwan have, you know. I shan't say one, but you know, they all have Indian names, whereas really their real name is Johnny or something, you know, and they're from Birmingham, but they always have an Indian name. So he cornered me. I said, you know what, Johnny, I don't think it's, you know, obviously I'm going to pick up the odd ticket when I'm doing company business, so how's about we go halves on it? And that was it. I mean, he really lost it and had to be, he went for me. I got out of the way and he had to kind of be removed out of the hallway and outside the front door by the other guys. So here I am, I'm the bottom of the food chain guy, you know, literally the T-boy on the building site, and this is the boss. And he is coming apart at the seams in a very unseemly way, and I am managing to keep my cool. The difference, obviously, is that I'm in recovery, he's in active addiction, bless him, you know, no judgment there. If it had been a year earlier, then it would have been on, you know, because I would have reacted in exactly the same way. But I wasn't, I had a program and I was keeping it together. So it was very, kind of doubly humiliating for him, I guess. Anyway, that kind of blew over and he wasn't seen for a while. And word came down the grapevine that he'd gone off, kind of been intervened on and taken off to one of their big centres in Europe that I suppose for him was kind of doubling up as a rehab, you know, so he'd been carted off to treatment after that incident. And then he came back and slowly he was around and he wasn't quite so hot about it. He wasn't particularly, he was a bit better. And then he disappeared again. And then one day I got a call. And I picked it up. I said, "Who's that?" He said, "Johnny." I was kind of taken aback because he didn't obviously usually phone me. You know, I was the bottom of the food chain, right? And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "I'm fucked," basically. Pardon my French, but that's literally what he said. I said, "Okay, tell me more." And then he came out with it on the phone. You know, the whiskey drinking, full bottles of whiskey every day. The phone sex lines, as it was back in those days. So he had a dual addiction going on. He was spending thousands on these dratted phone lines. I said, "Okay, stay there. I'm going to come round and get you." So I went round to his house in my beat up old VW and picked him up. And my intention was to take him to a detox unit. So I was phoning around, nothing available. So I took him to a meeting first, right on the other side of London. And all the way he was pulling out, opening the door and dry retching into the gutter, and he was in a real state, in withdrawal. So I probably should have taken him straight to a detox or a A&E department, but back then I didn't really know better. So, and I took him to a meeting, a 12-step meeting, and then I think we got him off somewhere else. But the moral of that story is, who did he reach out to when he hit rock bottom and was in a place of surrender and ready and needed help, to his eternal credit? You know, I actually think it was amazing that he did that. It completely healed our relationship, and I never saw him again, actually. But I have great respect for him for doing that. But the other thing it tells us is that little old me, at the age of 28, you know, the T-boy on the building site, in that scenario, I was the leader. You know, I'm not, obviously I hope that doesn't come over as boastful. It's not intended that way, it's just literally true. I was the one who exhibited leadership through example in that situation, which wasn't lost on me. And it was proof, evidence that your station doesn't really matter. It's how you live your life, and how you live your life screams a lot louder than the words that come out of your mouth, right? And so that was a real learning for me, and I have to say I've lost that over the years. That did not necessarily remain with me, you know, without break. There's been many periods where I have become Johnny again, you know. But I always have that as a benchmark. That type of humility, I suppose, wins people over, and it creates trust. And when they're really in it, then you are the one they will turn to. So as I often say to my clients and younger people in recovery and stuff, you know, you might be the screw up right now, the black sheep of the family, etc. But a few years down the line, and most crucially with some solid personal growth work, which in recovery from addiction is not usually accessed through talking endlessly about your feelings. It's not a program of talking, it's a program of action. It's about doing things, amending situations, taking the responsibility onto yourself. Once you're the other side of that, who's to say you might become the rock of the family? So today, the black sheep, tomorrow, the rock of the family. And I've seen that happen many times.